A widowed nurse walked into a free medical clinic in Lagos, with her nursing certificate folded inside her purse and a 6-year-old son holding her hand. The doctor on duty didn't flinch at her torn dress, didn't react to the hunger in her son's eyes, didn't even pause when she whispered that she hadn't eaten in 2 days. But when he turned to the second page of her intake form and read the name written there, his hands stopped moving. His face went pale. The stethoscope slipped from his fingers and clattered against the tile floor. Because what was written on that page didn't just explain how Adaeze Okonkwo ended up standing in a charity line begging for food and medicine for her sick child. It exposed a secret buried for 11 years, a debt that had never been repaid, and a truth that connected these two strangers in a way neither of them could have predicted. The nurses behind the counter stared. The security guard stepped forward, unsure. And Dr. Kwame Mensah, one of the most respected physicians in West Africa, a man who had performed surgery on presidents and ministers, dropped to one knee in front of a starving woman he had never officially met, and said 7 words that silenced the entire waiting room. 32-year-old Adaeze Okonkwo had once been the kind of woman other women whispered about in admiration. Head nurse at St. Catherine's Private Hospital in Victoria Island, Lagos. The kind of nurse who caught diagnoses doctors missed, who stayed past midnight when a mother needed comfort, who was mentioned by name in patient thank you letters more often than half the surgeons on staff. By 28, Adaeze was earning 600,000 naira a month, living in a 2-bedroom flat in Ikoyi with tiled floors that echoed when she walked across them in her nursing shoes. Her uniform was always pressed, her hijab always neat, her nursing badge polished every morning with a soft cloth before she left the house. She smelled like antiseptic and quiet confidence. Her small leather bag carried a stethoscope, 3 pens, a notebook filled with patient notes, and a photograph of her late mother tucked into the inner pocket. Her mother, Adaeze Okonkwo, had raised Adaeze alone in a small village outside Enugu after her father died in a farming accident. Adaeze sold roasted corn by the roadside during the day and washed clothes for wealthy families at night. She had hands rough as tree bark and a voice soft as evening rain. And she had one belief she repeated like a prayer, one sentence she pressed into Adaeze's spirit from the time the girl could understand words. A woman who can heal others will never be truly poor, my daughter. Knowledge in your hands is bread on your table. Adaeze carried that sentence like a shield through nursing school in Nsukka, through night shifts in overcrowded government hospitals, through years of climbing from junior nurse to senior nurse to head of ward. Her mother's voice had been her compass, her armor, her proof that if she healed enough, cared enough, worked hard enough, the world would always keep a door open for her. And for a while, it did. Emeka Adebayo entered her life the way a beautiful lie enters a quiet heart. He was 36, an assistant director at a large import-export company in Apapa Port. Tall, well-spoken, always in freshly starched agbadas, with a laugh that filled rooms and a wallet that never seemed to close. They met at a wedding in Ibadan. Emeka had helped her carry a tray of drinks to the bridal table, made her laugh 3 times before she even knew his surname. He proposed after 8 months, married her in a ceremony her mother attended in a new blue lace gown, the first new clothing Nneka had owned in 20 years. Adaeze remembered her mother crying at the reception and saying, "My daughter, this man's eyes are kind. Hold on to him." Nneka died 6 months after the wedding. A short illness, a rural clinic without proper equipment. Adaeze buried her mother in the village and returned to Lagos hollowed out and grateful that at least she had Emeka. At least she was not alone. The first sign came disguised as concern. "You work too hard, my love. Let me manage the money for both of us. You focus on the patients. I will take care of the accounts. It sounded like partnership. It felt like devotion. Adaeze, the woman who had watched her mother count coins on a wooden table for 30 years to feed one child, handed over her salary account details without a second thought. Because when love speaks softly, we forget to check whether its hands are empty or full. Her mother's voice whispered in the back of her mind, "Knowledge in your hands is bread on your table." And Adaeze believed she was safe because she had the profession, she had the certificate, she had the skill. What she did not have was the suspicion that the man sharing her bed was quietly emptying her future, one bank transfer at a time. When her son Chibuzo was born, Adaeze took 4 months of maternity leave. 4 months of sleepless nights and tiny fingers curling around hers, and the drowning, beautiful weight of new motherhood. 4 months where she did not check a single account, did not question a single receipt, did not notice that Emeka had begun withdrawing large sums to fund a business venture he never fully explained. Emeka did not shout. He did not raise his hand. He simply forged her signature on a loan document using her nursing salary as collateral, borrowed 4 million naira from a private lender in Surulere, invested it in a shipment of electronics that never arrived at the port, and disappeared one Tuesday morning while Adaeze was giving Chibuzo his morning bath. He left a short note on the kitchen table. "I am sorry. I will send money when I can." He never did. 2 weeks later, the lender came to the flat with 3 tall men in dark glasses. They took the television. They took the generator. They took the small gold chain Nneka had given Adaeze on her wedding day. When Adaeze went to the hospital the next morning, the human resources director called her into the office and closed the door. Emeka had also forged her signature on hospital petty cash requisitions over 6 months. Nearly 2 million naira was missing. There would be an investigation. Until it was resolved, she was suspended without pay. Adaeze sat in that office and felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. She was innocent. She could prove she was innocent. But proving it would take months, maybe a year. And she had a child at home who needed milk, and a landlord who needed rent, and a lender who was already calling her phone every hour of every day. She sold the flat's furniture piece by piece. She moved into a single room in Ajegunle, one of the poorest neighborhoods in Lagos, where the roof leaked when it rained, and the shared toilet at the end of the corridor was cleaned by nobody. She applied for nursing positions at 7 hospitals. Every single one ran a background check. Every single one saw the pending investigation from St. Catherine's. Every single one declined. The woman who had saved lives on the night shift for 8 years could not find a hospital willing to hire her to empty bedpans. 6 months passed. 6 months that felt like 6 years lived underwater. Adaeze braided hair on the roadside. She sold pure water sachets in traffic. She cleaned 3 houses a week for a woman in Yaba who paid her in old clothes and small bags of rice. Chibuzo grew thinner. His cheeks lost their roundness. He stopped asking when Daddy would come home. He stopped asking for meat. He stopped asking for anything at all. And his silence hurt Adaeze more than any word could have. One evening, Chibuzo developed a fever. It climbed through the night. By morning, his little body was burning, and his eyes had rolled back twice. Adaeze wrapped him in a wrapper and ran through the muddy streets of Ajegunle to the nearest chemist. The chemist looked at the child, looked at Adaze's empty hands, and shook his head. "Madam, this one needs a doctor, not medicine from a shelf. Take him to a hospital." She had 800 naira in her pocket. 800 naira. Not enough for a taxi, not enough for consultation fees, not enough for the drip he clearly needed. She stood in the middle of that dusty road with her son burning in her arms, and understood for the first time in her life what her mother had truly meant all those years ago. Knowledge in your hands is bread on your table, yes, but only if the world lets you use it. She had knowledge. She had trained hands. She could name the fever, guess the cause, prescribe the treatment, but she could not afford the medicine. And the certificate folded inside her purse could not buy a single ampule of paracetamol. She sat down on the curb and cried. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, with her son pressed against her chest. And for the first time, she doubted her mother's words. Then a woman selling boiled groundnuts across the road walked over. An older woman, wide face, kind eyes. "My sister, why are you crying?" Adaeze told her. The woman listened, then said, "There is a place, a free clinic, Dr. Kwame's clinic on Broad Street. He treats poor people 3 days a week, no charge. Today is one of those days. If you go now, you can still meet him." Adaeze wiped her face. She had heard the name Dr. Kwame Mensah before. Everyone in Lagos had, just a stethoscope around his neck and a pen tucked behind his ear. He greeted her softly in the Yoruba tradition, then in English. He examined Chibuzo first, because that was who Adaeze pointed to. He worked in silence, listening to the child's chest, feeling the glands under the jaw, pressing gently on the stomach. "Malaria," he said. "A bad case, but treatable. We will admit him for 2 nights, put him on a drip, give him the injections. He will be walking and eating by Friday." Adaeze exhaled a breath she had been holding for weeks. Then Dr. Kwame turned to the intake form the nurse had filled out. He read the first page casually. Standard: age, address, symptoms. He turned to the second page. He read the name of the child's mother, Adaeze Okonkwo, daughter of the late Nneka Okonkwo of Umuchu village, Enugu State. His hand stopped moving. Not slowly, not gradually. It just stopped, as if someone had pressed pause on a remote. His eyes lifted from the paper and landed on Adaeze's face with an expression she could not read. It was not pity. It was not confusion. It was recognition. Sharp. Personal. Like a man seeing a ghost from a life he had almost forgotten. "Your mother," he said quietly, "was Nneka Okonkwo of Umuchu village?" Adaeze frowned. "Yes, she passed 6 years ago. How do you know that name?" Dr. Kwame set the file down slowly on the desk. He took off his glasses. He pressed 2 fingers against the bridge of his nose and breathed a long breath, the kind of breath a man takes before he says something that is going to change the room. 11 years ago, he said, his voice suddenly heavy. I was a young doctor. I had just returned from London. I was on a rural outreach in Enugu State. My car broke down outside Umuchu village during the rainy season. I had walked for 2 hours in the rain. I collapsed on the side of the road with fever. Malaria. Cerebral. I would have died on that path. But a woman came out of a small mud house. She carried me inside. She had no money for medicine. She sold her only goat that night to send her nephew to the town to buy quinine. She fed me pepper soup. She stayed awake for 3 nights, wiping my forehead with cold water and praying. When I could stand again, I asked her name. She said, "I am Neka, just Neka. Go and heal others. That is enough thanks for me." Adaeze's hand went to her mouth. Dr. Kwame's eyes were glassy now. "I tried to find her afterwards. I sent money. It came back. The address was too vague. I sent people. They could not find the house. For 11 years, I have carried a debt to a woman I could not repay. And now, her daughter is standing in front of me, begging for medicine for her son." The consultation room went completely silent, except for the soft breathing of Chibuzo, sleeping against his mother's chest. Adaeze could not speak. Tears rolled down her face without sound. She remembered the story. Her mother had told it to her once, only once, when she was small. A sick young doctor in the rainy season. A goat sold. 3 nights of prayer. Her mother had never said the doctor's name, because she had never known it mattered. Dr. Kwame stood up slowly from his chair. And then this man, this famous physician who had treated presidents, this Oxford-trained specialist who charged £500,000 for a private consultation in Victoria Island, walked around his desk and dropped to one knee in front of Adaeze. In front of a starving widow in a torn dress, with a sick child in her arms. And he said the 7 words that would silence the entire waiting room when the nurses heard about it later. "Your mother saved my life. Now yours." He took her free hand in both of his. His hands were warm and steady, the hands of a man who had held thousands of lives and had learned that the greatest miracles are always the smallest ones. "Whatever you need," he said, "whatever your son needs, whatever you have suffered in these last months, tell me. I will not let this debt stay open one more day." Adaeze finally found her voice. It came out cracked and small. "Doctor, I am not asking for charity. I only came for treatment. I can pay you back over time. I am a nurse. I have my certificate. I can work." Dr. Kwame smiled through the tears in his own eyes. "My sister, you are not asking. I am offering. And this is not charity. This is a debt 11 years overdue with heavy interest." He stood, called in his senior nurse, and gave rapid instructions. Chibuzo was to be admitted immediately to the private ward, not the general one. Best drip, best medication, private nurse. Adaeze was to be given a room in the staff quarters attached to the clinic while her son recovered. A meal was to be brought to her within 30 minutes, and every meal after that until further notice. And in the morning, she was to come to his office at 9 sharp. There was more to discuss. Adaeze slept for the first time in 6 months without her body clenched like a fist. The staff quarters was small. 1 bed, 1 wooden wardrobe, 1 window that looked out onto a mango tree in the compound. But the sheets were clean. The pillow smelled of soap. And down the corridor, in a proper hospital bed, her son was sleeping under a mosquito net with a drip in his arm and color already returning to his face. She woke before sunrise. She washed in the small bathroom, put on the cleanest of her 2 dresses, wrapped her hair neatly, and walked to Chibuzo's room. He was awake. He smiled at her weakly and whispered, "Mama, the doctor gave me juice." She kissed his forehead and cried again, silently, into the collar of her dress so he would not see. At 9 sharp, she stood outside Dr. Kwame's office. He opened the door himself and offered her the chair across from his desk. On the desk was a cup of tea, still steaming, poured for her. Simple things, small kindnesses. The kind that undo a woman who has been carrying the world alone for too long. "I made calls last night," Dr. Kwame said. "I want you to listen before you refuse." He explained everything with the same steady precision he used when explaining a diagnosis. First, the investigation at St. Catherine's. He knew the medical director there personally. They had trained together in London. He would speak to the man this week. Adaeze's forged signatures were, in fact, easy to disprove with a formal handwriting analysis. It was cheap. It was standard. It had simply never been done because Adaeze could not afford a lawyer. Dr. Kwame would pay for the analysis. He would also arrange a lawyer, an old friend from Lagos Bar, who owed him 3 favors and would consider this the payment of 1. Second, the debt. The 4 million naira Emeka had borrowed. Under Nigerian law, a forged signature on a loan document was fraud. The lender had known Emeka was married, had approached Adaeze's salary account illegally, and had used intimidation tactics that were also illegal. A properly filed police report and a lawyer's letter would almost certainly cause the lender to withdraw. If they did not, Dr. Kwame would cover the debt personally as an interest-free loan, repayable when and if she was ever able. Third, work. There was a nurse manager position opening at his private practice in Victoria Island in 6 weeks. Head of nursing. Full salary, full benefits, and a small flat in the staff residence attached to the clinic. It was hers if she wanted it. No favor, no pity. He had already reviewed her old work records. She was more qualified than any of the current applicants. Adaeze stared at him. She could not speak for a long time. Finally, she said, "Doctor, this is too much. I cannot accept all of this. I do not know how I will ever repay it." Dr. Kwame folded his hands on the desk. He looked at her with eyes that had suddenly aged into something ancient and kind. "My sister, do you know how much a goat cost in Amuchu village in the rainy season 11 years ago? Do you know how much 3 nights of a stranger's prayer are worth? Do you know the price of pepper soup fed by hands that had almost none for themselves?" He paused. "There is no repaying it. There is only passing it on. When you are back on your feet, when your son is grown, when you meet another woman in torn clothes with a sick child, you will remember your mother, and you will do for her what your mother did for me. That is how the debt is closed. Not with money, with mercy." Chibuzo was discharged on the 5th day, not the 2nd. Dr. Kwame had insisted on the longer stay to build the child's strength back with proper meals and proper rest. On the morning they left the clinic, the nurses lined up in the compound to say goodbye. One of them pressed a small paper bag into Adaeze's hands. Inside was a folded envelope with a month's worth of housekeeper wages the staff had collected among themselves after hearing what Dr. Kwame had shared with them, with permission, about who Adaeze's mother had been. Adaeze wept openly this time. She did not try to hide it. Chibuzo, still weak but standing, held her hand and did not understand why so many strangers were being kind. But he decided he liked it. Dr. Kwame drove them himself to a small rented room he had arranged in a quieter part of Yaba, closer to the clinic, safer than Ajegunle. The rent for 3 months was already paid. A mattress, a small stove, a kettle, and a basket of food from the clinic canteen were already inside. On the wall above the bed, someone had hung a small framed photograph. Adaeze walked closer and saw it was a photocopy of a photograph, enlarged and framed. Her mother. Adaeze Okonkwo. Sitting on a wooden stool in front of a mud house in Umuchu village, roasting corn on a small grill. Adaeze had never seen this photograph before. She turned to Dr. Kwame. He smiled softly. I took it myself, the morning after my fever broke, before I left the village. I wanted to remember her face. I have carried a copy in my wallet for 11 years. The investigation at St. Catherine's took 6 weeks. The handwriting analysis was conclusive. Adaeze had never signed the requisition documents. The hospital issued a formal apology. Her name was cleared. Her back pay for 6 months of suspension was released in a lump sum. It was not a fortune, but it was enough to breathe with. The lender in Surulere, faced with a formal police report and a letter from Dr. Kwame's lawyer citing 3 specific sections of Nigerian criminal law, quietly withdrew the debt and disappeared from her life. Emeka was located in Cotonou 4 months later by a private investigator Dr. Kwame's lawyer had hired. He was arrested at the border, trying to re-enter Nigeria with a stolen passport. He would spend the next several years answering for what he had done, not only to Adaeze, but to 2 other women in Benin and Togo, whose accounts had also been drained by the same signature forging pattern. Adaeze did not attend his court hearings. She had nothing left to say to him. She had a son to raise, and she had work to do. Adaeze started as head of nursing at Dr. Kwame's Victoria Island practice on a Monday in October. She wore a new uniform, dark navy, well-fitted, with her name embroidered above the pocket. Adaeze Okonkwo, RN, head of nursing. She stood in front of the mirror in the small staff residence flat, Chibuzo now enrolled in a good private nursery school 2 streets away, and she looked at herself for a long time. Her mother would have cried. Her mother would have said, I told you, my daughter, knowledge in your hands is bread on your table. And now Adaeze finally understood the whole truth of that sentence. Knowledge alone had not saved her. Her nursing certificate had not stopped Emeka. Her training had not fed Chibuzo in Ajegunle. What had saved her was knowledge in her mother's hands 11 years earlier, given freely to a stranger without any expectation of return. A goat sold in the rain, pepper soup at midnight, 3 nights of prayer. That was the seed. And this uniform, this desk, this steady salary, this flat with a working stove and a mosquito net and a mango tree outside the window. This was the harvest. Not for her mother, for her. She threw herself into the work. She reorganized the nursing rotations. She introduced patient follow-up calls that reduced complications by nearly 1/3 within 4 months. She trained the junior nurses with the patients her mother had once trained her. She was firm, but never cruel. She was quick, but never careless. She was, everyone at the practice quickly agreed, exactly the nurse manager Dr. Kwame had believed she would be. 6 months in, Dr. Kwame called her into his office one evening after the last patient had left. He handed her a small envelope. Inside was a bank draft for 2 million naira. What is this? She asked. A starting fund, he said, for the free clinic on Broad Street. I am expanding it. 3 days a week is not enough. There are too many mothers waiting too long. I want to open it every day, and I want you to run it. Not just as a nurse, as the director. Adaeze sat down slowly. Doctor, I do not know if I am ready for that. He smiled that quiet smile. Your mother had no degree. She had no training. She had no wealth. She was ready when she was needed. You have all 3 now. You are more than ready. You have simply been waiting for permission to believe it. Adaeze opened the expanded Broad Street Clinic on a Tuesday in April. 6 full days a week. Free consultation, free basic medication, free malaria treatment for children under 12, free antenatal care for pregnant women, free HIV testing and counseling. The waiting room was full from the first morning. Women with sick babies, old men with coughs, a young boy with a bandage over one eye. The same faces, different bodies. The same tired dignity of poor people who had walked long distances for the smallest chance of being seen. Adaeze sat behind the intake desk on the first morning herself. She wanted to greet every patient personally. She wanted them to know that the woman in charge of this place had once stood exactly where they were standing. Around 10 in the morning, a young woman walked in with a boy in her arms. The woman's dress was torn at the shoulder. Her eyes were low. She had the kind of thinness that comes not from diet, but from months of missed meals. Her son had a fever. His body was hot. His breathing was shallow. Adaeze took her hand across the desk. "My sister," she said softly. "Sit down. You are safe here. What is your name?" The woman whispered her name. Fatima. Fatima from Kano State. Widowed. Alone in Lagos. No family. No work. Adaeze looked at her for a long moment, and in Fatima's face she saw herself, 6 months earlier on that curb in Ejegunle, holding a burning child, believing the world had run out of doors to open. She stood up. She walked around the desk. She knelt in front of Fatima, the way Dr. Kwame had once knelt in front of her. And she said the same 7 words, changed slightly, because they were not a debt this time. They were a promise. "You are not alone anymore. Sit." She personally carried Chibuzo, no, she caught herself, Fatima's son, into the treatment room. She personally started the drip. She personally paid for a small hot meal from the canteen next door, for Fatima to eat while she waited. And when Fatima whispered, "Madam, I cannot repay any of this," Adaeze smiled the smile her mother used to smile in the village, and she said, "There is no repaying it, my sister. There is only passing it on. One day, when your son is grown, when you are strong again, you will remember this room, and you will do the same for another woman. That is how the debt is closed. Not with money, with mercy." A year passed. The Broad Street Free Clinic became one of the most respected community clinics in Lagos. Journalists wrote about it. Ministers visited it. A young British medical student wrote her thesis on it. Adaeze's name began to appear in newspaper articles. Not for scandal this time, for service. Chibuzo turned 7. He was in a good school. He had gained weight. He laughed loudly again, the way small children are supposed to laugh. He had begun asking questions about his grandmother, Neka, the roasted corn seller from Umuchu village, and Adaeze told him the story of the goat and the pepper soup and the young doctor in the rain. She told it again and again, and each time she told it, Chibuzo listened as if it were the first time. One quiet evening in December, Adaeze took Chibuzo on a long trip. They drove east from Lagos, through Ibadan, past Akure, into the green hills of Enugu State. They stopped in Umuchu village. The mud house where Neka had raised her was still standing, though someone else lived in it now. Adaeze walked with her son to the small cemetery on the edge of the village. She knelt at her mother's grave. She placed a fresh bunch of flowers on the earth. Chibuzo knelt beside her, small and serious, and Adaeze whispered into the ground, "Mama, the goat came back. It came back 1,000 times over. He remembered you. He never forgot. And now, because of you, I am able to sell goats too, every day, to every woman who walks into that clinic. Rest well, Mama. Rest well. Behind her, standing quietly at a respectful distance beside the rented car, was Dr. Kwame Mensah. He had insisted on driving them himself. He had insisted on stopping at every village along the way to buy roasted corn for Chibuzo, because roasted corn was the only correct food for such a journey. He watched Adaeze at her mother's grave, and he took off his hat, and he bowed his head, because some debts are never truly repaid. Some seeds keep growing forever. Some mothers reach across 11 years and 2 generations and 1,000 kilometers to save their children through the kindness they once gave a stranger in the rain. Adaeze Okonkwo walked into a free clinic on a cold, rainy morning with a nursing certificate folded in her purse and a 6-year-old son burning with fever in her arms. She thought she had lost everything: her career, her home, her savings, her name, her dignity, her faith in the words her mother had pressed into her spirit since childhood. But she was wrong. She had not lost her knowledge. She had only forgotten that knowledge, like kindness, does not always come back through the same door it went out of. Sometimes it takes 11 years. Sometimes it takes a generation. Sometimes it comes back through a stranger on a rural road in the rainy season, remembered forever by a young doctor who never stopped searching for the woman who had saved him. She had not lost her dignity. She had only forgotten that walking into a free clinic and asking for help is not the end of a story. It is the bravest chapter in one. She had not lost her mother. She had only forgotten that a good mother's love outlives her. It waits in the world like a seed in dry soil, waiting for the right rain, the right moment, the right stranger to bloom for. The doctor looked at her file and froze. Not because the name was famous, but because it was familiar. Because kindness, like blood, has memory. And because sometimes the person who changes your life is not a billionaire, not a miracle, not luck. It is a mother you have already buried, reaching from the earth through a stranger's hand to say, "My daughter, I am still here. I am still feeding you. I am still selling goats for you in the rain." If this story touched you, share it with a mother who is fighting alone tonight. Subscribe for more African stories that remind us what it means to be human. Comment below with one word, your mother's name. Because every good mother deserves to be spoken out loud, again and again, long after she is gone. See you in the next story.